Hello and welcome everybody. Welcome back to ComedIan MTG. My name is Ian. Today we are talking about Salt City. This is a Utah-based cEDH tournament that sort of came out of nowhere, but it's a tournament that had a very grassroots start and ended up having 79 participants in this first run of the tournament. And not only that, but they're actually going to be putting on a second event coming up really soon, which we'll be talking about later in this video. But without any further ado, we're going to break down the top 16 of this cEDH tournament. While we're watching, remember to hit like and subscribe and hit that little bell icon if you want to get notifications on the channel. Also, feel free to check out patreon.com/ComedIanMTG, where you can get great perks such as having your name in the show notes and many more. All right, so this first list we have here is Time Sieve by Best Forte. We have a Tivit list here. This is a pretty classic Tivit list going over some of the standard pieces that you often find in Tivit. A few of the little spicier options here and there, though. However, things like Lavinia and Malevolent Hermit are not the most common pieces in these lists. Malevolent Hermit especially is definitely not one you find in a lot of lists nowadays, unless they're doing like either Hermit Druid stuff, or I've noticed it being played a lot with Tivit decks, because with Tivit you can play your Malevolent Hermit and then sacrifice it right away to draw 2 cards and then have it ready to be cast from its graveyard half. But Malevolent Hermit, as I mentioned, not a card often seen. Apart from that, the Black Sun Zenith, another, anti-creature piece being held up in this deck. It's definitely not one that's normally played, but I kind of like the idea that you are playing more of these flexible board wipes that sort of allow you to keep Tivit on the battlefield, although this one definitely will permanently reduce Tivit's power, which is not exactly the hope when you're playing Tivit, is to, you kind of need that clock in the air for sure. Some other interesting cards here in Dovin's Veto and Soul Partition, which is not one I tend to see in a lot of these mid-range decks. I find the Soul Partition is really good if your deck is a lot more aggressively slanted, if you need to either double a dockside or get rid of something for just a single turn. But in a deck like Tivit, where you're trying to sort of grind the game out a little bit more, it's not a card that I'm used to seeing. This Tivit also running Ad Nauseam, which is a big debate with a lot of Tivit players. I find that most Tivit players lean away from the Ad Nause style Tivit decks, but if you're a type of player who can lean into this mid-range strategy and also get away with resolving an Ad Nauseam, that definitely helps too. We have Kenrith the Returned Daddy by Frodo7198. This is a pretty sweet Kenrith mid-range list. It's got a lot of the sort of classic hybrid Kenrith stuff that we're kind of used to seeing in the format. The idea basically being between, you can be a Turbo Ad Nauseam deck, you can play your Intuition Underworld Breach lines, but also keep your creature combos, keep your things like Emil Dockside, and then you still get your access to your Thassa's Oracle while being able to play a slew of mana dorks that allow you to really take advantage of the game. But yeah, this is the idea of the deck, is to sort of hybridize this, mid-range stuff where you're playing these like turn 1 dorks, and then, using cards like Neoform to get them into your Docksides and your Thassa's Oracle, start leveraging a bunch of advantage, and then using your Emil to make infinite mana with your Kenrith. I'm surprised to see no Phantasmal Image in this build. I feel like it's sort of just a staple in most Kenrith lists, because you're able to actually use it to go off with either a Dockside on your field or an opponent's field, and Phantasmal Image with a certain amount of treasures, of course, but obviously the card has a decent amount of utility apart from that niche value as well. Some classic mid-range pieces here, finding your best tutors in your 5 colors, your best interaction pieces. This deck's definitely a little bit slower than a lot of lists that we're used to, playing a lot of counter spells in the 2 mana slot and interaction pieces in the 2 mana slot, playing things like Mana Drain, Delay, using Limb Duel's Vault as a tutor, which is a card that I feel like a lot of people have really sort of let go in the format, and it's still a piece that's really good at getting around cards like Opposition Agent and whatnot. But yeah, it's definitely a hybrid mid-range deck. This list has a lot of combos in it, though, I've noticed, compared to a lot of other kind of lists I've seen. So it has Underworld Breach, which can, do the normal Brain Freeze, Lionside Diamond stuff, but can also go off with Grinding Station. It's got Icecrown Scepter with only like 15 artifacts, which is like pretty interesting, but also there's a decent amount of mana dorks as well. It's got the Ad Nause lines, it's got Intuition to go for that. So like having Isocron and Emil Dockside and Thassa's Oracle, the Mana Consultation, and like all of these different ways to be able to combo off in this deck. This deck is definitely extremely layered, really going for the approach of like not really needing Kenrith for anything except for the outlet in the command zone. Definitely much more of a like, I'm gonna jam as many combos as I can into this deck and see what happens pile. We have Riled Up White Kid with Sisay Tutor Chains. Now, this is a pilot who has been playing Sisay for like a really long time, if not like maybe even longer than I think Rebel has been playing Sisay. It's one of those names that I'm used to like from very old Cockatrice tournaments way back in the day. So cool to see them still, putting up numbers with Sisay as time goes on. First thing I notice here with this Sisay list is we have our Aminatu and our Dihada, but there's no Nicol Bolas, so not going for the Nicol Bolas line finishers. If you notice, we got in the enchantments, there's no Oath of Teferi, but this version going for the Cultist of the Absolute combos, which you go Cultist, you combo that into your Dihada, And then from Dihada, you get another activation. You go and grab your Chromatic Orrery, and from there you're able to then start like tapping the Orrery for an activation, getting things like your Aminatu and flickering that, and then eventually getting a position where you can start doing Derevi stuff and be able to win with Derevi and Emil and whatnot. And while you have the Chromatic Orrery on the battlefield, it's definitely a bit of a different way to play Sisay. It opens up some of the slots that the mid-range deck doesn't have, but it also has pieces that I would argue have like a much lower floor. Like cards like Cultist and Chromatic Orrery are kind of dead in your deck 90% of the time, whereas like the other versions of Sisay tend to be a little bit more synergistic just in the general game plan of what they're doing. This list also playing a decent amount of tempo pieces and the normal stuff like, you know, Kinnan, Lavinia, Derevi, Luris, and Savala, all kind of classic ways to go through it. Although Displacer Kitten and Razaketh definitely stick out to me as some of the more interesting pieces in this deck. Razaketh is definitely one that I've never seen in a Sisay list, so it's kind of interesting to see it here. And I'm wondering how much like actual, there's like almost no reanimation for Razaketh, so I'm guessing this is just a card that gets hard cast. I'm seeing like Peer into the Abyss for the same thing. Okay, so this list is also on Underworld Breach, which is worth noting, but no. Okay, so it's got Brain Freeze. Wow, this is really, really quirky because it's got the LED Brain Freeze stuff, but it's also got Flicker Lines with Dihada being a card that you can tutor with Sisay and then be able to go off with that, which is pretty cool. It's definitely not a typical way to build Sisay. And this list is definitely kind of going for more of a like Sisay plus a backup good stuff strategy, which is a lot more like the NBC Najila list that exists right now, but this one's definitely taking some unique lines to be able to get there. We have Ricky, which is one of the pilots who've worked on this list, playing the Kenrith the Mad King list, which I'm pretty sure is, or at least was, one of the database Kenrith lists. This is a Hermit Druid Kenrith, which I have not seen in a considerable amount of time, but it's pretty cool to see Hermit Druid still out there taking W's. You have your Ad Nauseam lines, which will help you sort of create an accelerated game plan. You can do stuff with Underworld Reach, but now I'm noticing between this and the actual last deck we covered, I noticed Mystic Remorse, but no Rhystic Studies, which is definitely something I would consider pretty atypical in the format right now, seeing as many people argue that it's the best card in the format. So no Rhystic Studies, kind of wild in this list, but apart from that, it's very, very aggressive early game Hermit Druid stuff. For those who don't know, Kenrith is actually pretty decent with Hermit Druid because it allows you to play the Hermit Druid and give it haste and give you an uncountable way to reanimate your Thassa's Oracle if you get to the late game. So there's a lot of different reasons why Kenrith is actually pretty solid as a Hermit Druid enabler in the command zone, despite it being a little more expensive than traditional Hermit Druid lists. But yeah, this deck's definitely trying to get the Hermit Druid thing going, get it down really quickly. You can also use Cephalid Illusionist and Lightning Greaves to do the same thing, where you switch between the Illusionist and another creature, and that will actually mill out your entire library in the same way that Hermit Druid would as well. But definitely kind of unique to see this 5-color Hermit deck be able to make the top 16 of this tournament. Definitely not ready for 5-color Hermit Druid for sure. Just a reminder, we are talking about Salt City 2 today, which is the sequel to this tournament, and that is an event in Utah, and that will be in the middle of October, Saturday, October 14th. The tickets will be going on sale, and there's going to be a link in the description of this video to get tickets to that event. So if you live in the Utah area or you're considering traveling out to an event like this, feel free to check it out. All of the information that I have about this event will be in the description down below, and there will be a link where you can go click on that. I believe tickets are looking like they're going to be around $30. And also, the Salt City folks wanted me to shout out an event called NACL, which is going to be in August 26th. It is not this group running it, but it's a similar group for the Salt Lake City sort of region for CEDH. So, they're trying to boost local events and stuff like that, which is pretty cool. But yeah, Salt City Rock Salt, the sequel tournament, is going to be on October 14th. That's a Saturday at Mythos Games. So if you're interested in the sequel to this tournament and you're in that area, come check that out. Once again, LED grand prize for the winner. We have Eat More Gnome with Farming While Blue. This is Blue Farm. This is a pretty classic Blue Farm list. Nothing too insane here. This is one of those lists moving away from Peer into the Abyss, which is a piece that I don't traditionally see a lot of in Blue Farm, but I feel like lately it's been just played more for some reason. But this list opting to move a little bit away from that newer innovation of playing Peer into the Abyss, and going for, I guess not new innovation, right, but these are the newer swing and the newer trend of playing Peer into the Abyss. But this one's playing much more of the classic Blue Farm stuff, a few more of the creature engines, right? We have our Fairy Mastermind, Lavinia, and Professional Facebreaker, just to basically turn Blue Farm into like the clean, efficient mid-range deck it is, and be able to leverage advantage and use your attackers to get in there, draw you some cards, make some mana, and then eventually potentially turn that into a win, either through Mnemonic Betrayal or Thassa's Oracle, Mnemonic Consultation, Ad Nauseam, Intuition for Underworld Breach, all of the classic lines. Bearded Hulk here with my captain. Now this is much more of a traditional Nicol Bolas, Aminatou, and Oath of Teferi style list, but this list is also running Cultist of the Absolute Chromatic Orrery line, so this one really heavily packed in with combos. I'm noticing this is a very combo heavy Sisay list, which, you know, Sisay lists are already pretty usually filled to the brim with combos, but this one really just trying to opt into as many as possible. Playing Thassa's Oracle and Demonic Consultation, which I know not all of the Sisay lists are running, playing Displacer Kitten lines as well to be able to go off with 3-mana Teferi. So this list is genuinely just jam-packed, full of combos, you know, eschewing a bit of interaction, stuff like that, so that they can just play every combo under the sun and be able to go off with Sisay at a pretty incredible pace. We have cEDH Kark and Kark by Fizzle and Monster Cable Car. That one was unnecessarily hard for me to say. Monster Cable Car. We have Sakashima list, which is doing the Sakashima thing. It's been actually a while since I've seen Sakashima do pretty well. I know I've made note that it's been sort of disappeared from the meta a little bit. I played against Ken Bauman recently, who was just, you know, playing the deck, doing very well with it, and, you know, able to leverage the same amount of wins as normal. But yeah, the deck's still pretty solid. It's still extremely hard to interact with, and a competent pilot is still able to really leverage a lot of advantage from this combination of commanders. You know, using cards like Tavern Scoundrel or Veyran and Stormkill Artist as your pieces that really start to blend your mission together and get your deck online. Jessica's Will being obviously one of the best cards in the deck. My Desire, I know, is a little bit in and out with some of these lists. Some lists are really on to it, and then some lists are just think it's pretty unnecessary. Light Up the Stage is another one in that category where I know some pilots are really into this card and think it's like an awesome draw engine, whereas others are kind of, you know, unhappy with the ability to not get into your opponents and therefore not really hoping to use Light Up the Stage. But for those who don't know, this Sakashima classic Storm deck, you know, you're trying to flip and get to a situation where you have both a Kark and a second copy of Kark, and then hopefully one of your other enablers like Bergie, Tavern Scoundrel, etc., and you'll be able to just go through some crazy Storm turns. And because of the fact that having 2 Karks allows you to copy a lot of spells and return spells to hand, it makes it pretty easy to storm off. Well, I mean, it's a very complicated deck, so it's not easy to storm off, but, you know, storming does lead to wins. We got cEDH Grandma Got Game by Big Anonymous. This is a Rielle deck, which is not a list I'm used to seeing in these top tables a lot. I think Lyndon from the Into the North podcast is like the only other person I know who really plays this deck in cEDH nowadays. But the idea is to basically create scenarios in which you are discarding cards every single turn, and then whenever you do that, you draw cards off of Rielle. And that's pretty much the idea of the deck, is to be able to leverage Rielle's ability. She's clean, she's efficient, she's really low to the ground, and then she can actually become a late game beater. I've seen Rielle come in for like 20 something damage on multiple games. This list, you know, going into some of these like curiosity style win conditions, which I really actually like from this archetype. You know, really the biggest problem I've always had with Rielle is the lack of ways to actually turn the corner and win the game. And I like that this list is not shying away from those, right? We have our dual caster lines, we've got these curiosity combos with Glenhorn Buccaneer and Brawlin Skyship Rider. I'm assuming we're also going to be seeing an Underworld Breach here, yep, and then Curiosity regular just there in the deck. So, you know, definitely a number of ways to turn some of your advantage into a win. And as I said, I really like playing a bunch of win conditions in these colors because it's traditionally been a deck where people have really skimped on them. So Wizards Winning Windows by Frosty, I don't know. This is Analla Wizard combo. It's the classic Analla stuff. We're not really seeing a lot of the innovations that like Tainted was playing with a lot of the Goblin Engineer stuff or Emery Lurker of the Lock. But what we do see here is the well tried and true Analla deck, right? We are trying to get a Spellseeker onto the battlefield and execute a layered combo that will allow you to win with Spellseeker and only a single mana up after your spell, or black mana, I believe. This one definitely playing a few value wizards that aren't always in these lists. Things like Aether Channeler really stick out as something that can start to do some interesting stuff. I know there's also, you could potentially combo with Dockside in that card, because what you can do is you can have the copy of the Aether Channeler target the original Aether Channeler, put that back in your hand, and then the original Aether Channeler bounces your Dockside. So you play the Dockside again, then play the Channeler, copy it with Analla, and that's infinite mana. I believe you would need 7 mana for that to work, but also Aether Chandler is just like a really nice way to, play it with Analla and then bounce 2 problematic cards that your opponents have on the battlefield. There are also Analla pilots who I would love if you know how this line works. I know that Rigless Technomancer and Bloodline Necromancer are a combo that works through Rule of Law, and if you know how that line works, please feel free to throw it down in the comments of this video, because it is not a line that I've taken the time to learn, but I know it does that thing, and I know it's good. But that's about it. But yeah, Analla's trying to go really fast. It's a deck I think that's like pretty underrepresented in the format, just I think because it's difficult. Like, it's not an easy combo to work through, and it's not it does fold to a certain amount of stacks pieces, but it's really cool to see Analla still doing pretty well and getting out there and putting up results, even though it's been kind of quiet for a bit. This is a wild list, I'm not gonna lie. I don't know how to interpret it, but it's really cool. This is a list called Esika's Pretty Cat, maybe some other stuff by Bay Slayer King. This is a wild sort of like prismatic bridge Esika, not combo deck, because it doesn't really combo with a lot of stuff. There's a lot of like Displacer Kitten things you can do in this deck using Fairy Time Reveler and Displacer Kitten. There's also, cards like Kinnan that are just like really strong with your commander on his front half. There's Divining Witch Thassa's Oracle lines as on top of the normal like Demonic Consultation lines and stuff like that. It's a weird, unique deck that I think is super cool. There's definitely some interesting stuff with like Reanimation, but not any of the classic lines here with like Underworld Breach and stuff like that for Intuition. Yeah, it's a bit of an odd list, and I genuinely don't exactly know how to even describe it. But it's definitely a unique deck, and I know like Displacer Kitten is a big part of this list, and being able to chain up combos with Displacer Kitten, it's kind of how you get to the end state. And it's nice that when you have a card like Birthing Pod here, that does allow you to turn your commander into a Displacer Kitten, which is obviously, once again, very important to the winning of this deck. So it's a weird, unique deck that is pretty cool, and it's really cool to see it in this tournament here, being the top 16. There's like so many different things to go into in this deck, but I feel like if you're the pilot who piloted this list to the top 16, I would love to hear in the comments down below any sort of insight you can give me on this deck, because there's so many unique and spicy lines here that it's like genuinely hard to be able to figure out a decent amount of them. But it's a wild deck, definitely a 5-color pile of like pretty decent stuff that, and obviously the Displacer Kit and stuff like we talked about is clearly the priority as far as like going for the win. We have Divergent Sushi by the Mormonator. So this is a Divergent Transformations deck featuring Thrasios and Bile Smasher. Not a strategy that's been played in quite some time, I feel like. For those who don't know, you try to resolve the card Divergent Transformations, targeting both of your commanders, and from there you will flip over into the 2 creatures that you play in your deck, which would be Thassa's Oracle and Leveler, therefore winning the game immediately if that happens. And it's also nice because Divergent Transformation and Synthetic Destiny, which I believe is the other version of this effect, those are both instant speed. So you're able to remove your commanders from the game and then flip over until you hit the Thassa's Oracle Leveler combo and hopefully win the game on the spot. It's kind of the idea behind the deck. It's also playing ad nauseum stuff. It's an Underworld Breach deck, which is pretty cool because obviously you don't get access to creatures, so you kind of have to, use your commanders to their highest potential for sure. And then from that point, you're really just playing a bunch of really solid stuff. You're playing this sort of mid-range turbo ad naus thing, and then flipping over into straight up 2-card win conditions. So congrats to the Mormonator on this very unique deck. It's like very cool and very spicy, and not a deck that I was expecting to see in a top 16 of a tournament, but it's definitely really cool, and good for them for taking a strategy that is not played as much as it used to be and taking it to a top result. I'm also kind of looking through this list here and seeing if there's any other ways that like you can get those 2 creatures for a little cheaper. I'd be interested in a card like Sekenzin in this deck, just because it gets you the 2 bodies without actually having to sacrifice your commanders. But either way, this is definitely a unique list, and cool to see that it's made the top 16. Before we get into the results of the top 4 of the original Salt City, we're going to remind you that the second one is coming up October 14th at Mythos Gaming in Utah. So if you're interested in that event, once again, all the information will be down in the description below. You can find their Instagram, obviously shown on the screen here, and find any information you want about this tournament. As I said, tickets should be going live in the middle of September, so if you're interested, go check them out. Here is the start of our top 4 with Marcus the Enlightened Master by Monkey. This is Narset Enlightened Master making the top 4, where 4s. I've seen like a top 16 here or there from this deck, but never a top 4 finish. So this was one of the first commanders I ever really adored, because Khans of Tarkir was my first like real standard set that I like went to a pre-release for and things like that. So I have such a soft spot for Narset, and I've never been able to play it in cEDH. So seeing it actually make a top result with this deck is really, really cool. This list is full on play Narset as quickly as possible, give her haste, and just try and chain turns and extra combats together so that you can win the game, right? There's so many different ways to be able to take an extra turn, like Temporal Trespass, Time Stretch, Expropriate, Beacons of Tomorrow, Temporal Mastery, so many things like that. Then you have cards like Aminatus Augury, which hopefully dig you even farther to get more turn effects. Then you have cards like Enter the Infinite, which draw your whole deck, and at that point you should probably have a win for the game. There's also a bunch of different things like Nexus of Fate loops, which I'm pretty sure is actually how you really end the game after you do the Enter the Infinite stuff, is that you like draw your whole deck and go from there. But yeah, it's a lot of different ways to, we've got 16 artifacts here, all different ways to like dump a bunch of stuff onto the battlefield. This version playing Isochron Scepter, which I found pretty interesting, Isochron Dramatic Reversal, so I'm kind of wondering if that's specifically there so that there's like a nice clean outlet with Enter the Infinite to be able to win the game. But then, you get crazy stuff in this deck like Need for Speed, just another way to give Narset haste. I was kind of a hater when I first saw this card in Narset lists, but having done a couple of goldfishes with this deck, I kind of get why it's in there. Like, it seems kind of bad, but it genuinely is kind of one of those necessary evils. Then you have cards like Omniscience, who's flip in to just do silly stuff with this deck. And the idea is you really get your Narset down and just do the thing as quickly as possible. Really cool to see a Narset list. It's just not a list you get to see a lot. And, some people might not like the play patterns of it because it's just play the commander and then swing. But, whenever a unique cEDH deck gets to see play, and especially a deck that hasn't really seen a top table in a very, very long time, it's really cool. Also worth noting that there are cards like Cataclysm and Armageddon to really slow the game down, tempo out your opponents, and then be able to turn the corner. So congrats to Monkey for making this top result, and especially for taking a deck that is not often seen at these tables and making a top result with it. We have Blue Farm Iteration by Big Blue Aux. This is Blue Farm. Unique piece here in Grand Arbiter Augustin the Fourth. Definitely not a common blue farm option. But apart from that, it's pretty normal blue farm stuff. There's a Smothering Tithe, also a piece not often seen, usually more of a Opus Thief style piece, but blue farm is blue farm. We're gonna keep saying it on this channel as long as the deck's gonna do well. It's a deck that is very powerful. It does what it wants to do very well, using some of the pieces that like Koval was talking about by using like Containment Priest and Lavinia to really hate on things your opponents are doing, while also being able to leverage a lot of advantage on your own. So congrats to this pilot for making the top 4 of this tournament. We have Rushmi Doomsday. Now, Rushmi is a deck that a lot of people were just like, okay, well, it's strictly worse than Nimrus at this point, so why even play it? But this is a top 4 result by this Rushmi deck, and definitely nice to see it having like a lot of innovations as we're moving forward into the format. Playing Hermit Druid Thassa's Oracle lines, which is definitely not something I think a lot of people are used to. But for those who don't know, you can sort of Hermit Druid your whole library away, and then, as you can see, no basics here, like any classic Hermit Druid list, then use a card like our friends here, Croson Reclamation, or I believe there are some other ones as well, in Memory's Journey, and use those pieces to shuffle your Thassa's Oracle back into your library, so that when you go into your turn, you just play the Thassa's Oracle and you're able to win the game. So that's sort of the idea between that and, it's Thassa's Oracle lines are kind of the way to win with this deck, right? Because you can either do that what we talked about with Hermit Druid, you can do that with Paradigm Shift or Thought Lash, which is good because a lot of the problem people had with Rushmi was like it was a deck that was actually insanely good at being able to slowly control the game and take it over. But then what would happen is it didn't really have a way to actually win. And nowadays we have the ability to do these Thassa's Oracle lines and use cards like Thought Lash and Paradigm Shift to be able to actually turn the corner and make sure that you can win with this deck. So congrats to this pilot on, once again, a list that a lot of people have overlooked. I think it's a deck that not a lot of people thought is really a competitor. So being able to take this deck and that people kind of scoffed at and not only do well with it, but actually make it all the way to the top 4 of this tournament, while also, I believe, having the second best record of the top 4 is pretty solid. So congrats to our pilot here for taking a rather atypical deck and doing really, really well with with it. And we have Offensive Wombat with Sans Green Table Police. This is another blue farm deck. It's a blue farm deck talking about earlier that it is playing Peer into the Abyss. This version is also playing all 3 wheel effects, which I know a lot of blue farm pilots are not on anymore. A lot of them are just opting to do, like, if anything, 1 Wheel of Fortune. This list also playing Grim Hireling, which is not many people are still on much anymore, but it was a blue farm staple for like a considerable amount of time. And apart from that, it's a pretty standard blue farm deck. It does the thing where you cast the Tymna, cast the Crom, try and control the board until you want to be able to turn the corner and take advantage of the speed at which your deck can operate. And as I said, this list playing like some of the older tech of these, all 3 wheels, Peer into the Abyss, stuff like that. So, and Grim Hireling as well. So congrats to Offensive Wombat for taking down this Salt City tournament. Hope you guys enjoyed this breakdown of Salt City. I know for me, it was really cool to be able to interact with the tournament organizers of this event as we went through and talked about the first of these events, how it kind of came out of nowhere, and the fact that they got 79 participants in this tournament was insanely huge, and the fact that they're trying to really go out of their way to grow the cEDH scene in Utah, which is really, really awesome. I hope to one day be able to get out to one of these. Obviously, Utah is a considerable distance from where I'm at currently, but it's really cool to see this tournament group going and having such success in their first tournament that they are going to have another one. And as I said, that's going to be October 14th coming up later this year, and look out for those tickets in September. And once again, all the important links, all the important information for this event will be in the description down below, so please feel free to check that out. Without any further ado, thank you all for watching, and I hope to catch you in the next one. Peace.
I can feel the blood creeping up from the heathens. Got will, got fight, got pride, got reason. If they wanna go eat, then you know I'm gonna feed them. If you're coming for me, hope you're ready for a demon. I got eyes in the back of my head, I'm seeing. Take me for granted and you know I'm leaving. I'ma take what's mine with the webs I'm weaving. I could take this crowd from seeing to believing.